Thanks, Shane. Good afternoon or morning, everyone. My name is Frederica Nash. I'm an education analyst with the Center for Education Services here at RTI, and we welcome you to our webinar on social emotional learning and positive learning environments. We're excited that you are here with us today. As Shane said, please feel free to add questions to the chat box throughout the session. And we'll also have some interactive polls that you will be a part of throughout this session. So we ask that you continue to add your questions and participate in the polls, and we will follow up with this webinar with a summary of what we've provided here today so that you can fully participate. So I'm going to kick it over to my colleague, Dee McKenzie, who is also helping to facilitate this webinar today.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Dee McKenzie, and I'm also an education analyst with the Center for Education Services at RTI International. I consider it a pleasure to be with you all today. And so I'd like to take this time to give a quick discuss our outcomes for our time together today. So I'm going to advance this slide. All right, there we go. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to clarify a specific and common vision for social and emotional learning. There tend to be a lot of definitions that are out there in regards to social and emotional learning. So we're going to take a moment to figure out what is your specific definition when it comes to social and emotional learning. Next, we'll look at what it means to have a safe learning environment in your particular location. So whether that's in a school setting, whether it's a district setting, what does it look like to have safe learning environments? Next, we'll identify common practices for building these safe learning environments for students, as well as the teachers and administrators and staff. And then lastly, we'll develop next steps for building and supporting safe learning environments. People know what to do, but our struggle is typically when it comes to implementing those particular things. So now we'll move next to the agenda for today. So we're going to take a moment to actually discuss particular research that was done out in the state of North Carolina. The state of California, where they actually looked at social emotional learning practices in core districts and schools. Then secondly, we're going to look at what it means as far as building positive and safe learning environments. There's work that we are doing that's titled All Hands on Deck in the state of North Carolina. So Frederica is going to provide you some details and some results and anticipated results that we're looking to achieve in this particular project. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the practices that promote and support safe environments. And that's both at the school and district level. So, jumping into the report of core districts. So again, these core districts are located in the state of California, and these particular districts being Fresno, Garden Grove, as you can see that are stated there. These districts serve over 1 million students. And so the report addresses the following questions. First question being, how do educators in central office define social emotional learning? The second question is that in regards to the strategies used, what strategies do they use to enact and support the various conceptions of social emotional learning? And then lastly, the third question being, how districts support school-based practices intended to develop social emotional learning. And so as you in this report, they received a waiver under the No Child Left Behind legislation to develop innovative accountability systems that would go through the process of measuring these social emotional learning in the school districts and this impact, both academically and socially. So as they aim to measure and improve social emotional learning, there was a focus on closing the achievement gap at the middle school level in regards to African American students, specifically in math for African American students as well as Latinx students. And so the thought was that as the social emotional learning skills of students improved, that this would actually have some impact on the performance of those students. And so ultimately, this got to providing students with the academic support that they needed, as well as closing the gap. So we were therefore building racial equity. And then lastly, social emotional support for all students. So now let's take a moment to take a poll. I think something should flash up. All right. So the question that we have at hand is, what challenges have you faced or do you anticipate facing in implementing social and emotional learning, whether at the school level or at the district level? Okay, so we see Amy has shared that time to cover topics or finding ways to integrate with other curriculum. And time tends to be a huge issue. Staff mindset. Nice. Thank you, Gina. Integration school-wide versus being one person's responsibility. Some teachers not feeling comfortable thinking it should be, sorry, I lost it, should be the counselor, oh, should be the responsibility of the counselor or student services. Teacher buy-in, again, looking at staff mindset. Finding a person qualified to lead this initiative who is not already inundated by time. Again, we're looking at time being an issue. The idea of yet another thing. Thank you. So as we can see here, there are some topics that that basically surface and those that we're commonly familiar with. So the issue of time, as well as the issue with mindset being there, people actually buying into what it means to actually provide social emotional learning skills for students. That not being my responsibility or that being the responsibility of somebody else, because they're oftentimes concerned that this is yet another thing that I have to be responsible for. How will students feel about discussing? Okay. Interesting. So we're looking at social emotional learning at the student level. Um, Not only that, but also social emotional learning at the adult level. So will students actually be comfortable in expressing how they feel and what they're dealing with? Okay, great. And these are all definitely legitimate concerns and challenges that oftentimes are faced in trying to implement social emotional learning in our schools and at the district level. So we'll move on and let's take a look at some of the findings from this research as far as um, these core districts. So one of the things that they learned was that the the definition was often too broad, or it tends to overlap. There wasn't a clear, specific definition in regards to what it meant to be to to uh, to actually have social emotional learning. So some people may have defined it as something that is for students that come from a specific social economic background, or they may have thought that it was specifically just dealing with the social emotional needs of students, or that maybe social emotional learning was something that is only for adults versus something that is for the actual student. Um, so, SEL as a means versus an end. So, oftentimes, social emotional learning wasn't necessarily looked at something that would eventually get to um, having an impact on the academic performance of the student. So, again, there was more so this need to provide some type of um, addressing to the social emotional needs of students. And oftentimes, hence, as we saw earlier, people feeling like it's a need for the counselors or student services to address. So, so the question of whether this this particular process actually benefited the academic performance of students. Um, So these were some of the things that they found, as well as multiple practices used to advance social emotional learning. So oftentimes you would find that students were, excuse me, my apologies. Oftentimes you would find that this was something that was driven at the school level. And when it was driven at the school level, we're talking about the buy-in. So whether staff actually bought in, whether they had this whether there was a mindset to actually implement this in their classrooms, whether they would go the route of doing this formally, or whether it be something that was informally. So there's this idea that just showing students respect and treating them as individuals was an informal way of actually dealing with social emotional learning. Whereas some schools tended to take on programs, and these programs were implemented at the school level, and therefore there was a specific structure that was followed. And then you would find that there were often times that it was from the district level, so from the top down, where there was a particular curriculum that the district was supposed to follow, and it would be implemented in the various schools. So these were examples of these multiple practices that actually existed from school to school and from district to district. So ultimately, what they found in the conclusion of this particular report was that was that most of the time is there was an issue with communication of what it meant when you heard the term social emotional learning. And so there were these various, even though we knew what it meant and what it should look like, typically there was a struggle or a breakdown when it came to the actual implementation of these particular strategies and practices that would be used at the school level or at the district level. So again, research has shown that a key element of effective implementation is common language and definition, as well as the coordinated work towards a shared vision. So what we see here is that it's imperative that everyone is on the same page as far as what it means to implement social emotional learning and how that is defined. So now let's take another poll. Now, which of these categories aligns with your own definition of social emotional learning? Okay. So we have some responses. Based on our responses thus far, it looks like a majority of participants see that supporting student mental and emotional well-being, addressing the needs of the whole child. Okay. So as we can see there, we have um, various definitions as to what is considered social and emotional learning. So we noticed that supporting student mental and emotional well-being tended to, oh, actually, we had some coming in. So it looks like addressing the needs of the whole child. All right, it's now slipped into first place. But again, we're seeing that supporting student mental and emotional well-being and addressing the needs of the whole child tend to be at the top as far as how we define social and emotional learning. But that's not to say that none of these other particular categories actually fall into the definition. So
Okay, so as
creating a
we
safe
noticed,
and supportive. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Frederica.
sure. So as we noticed, there are many different ways that
Okay,
we
Frederica, I'll
ourselves
turn it
might
over to you
identify or
now.
define social and emotional learning, and sometimes those definitions overlap, so there's not one specific way that we define social and emotional learning. So in the core district, they use the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL. They use their definition, but they use a spin on it to include equity, because that was one of their major aims in their work to implement social and emotional curricula, programs, and interventions. And so as they thought about the CASEL definition and their specific focus on equity, they also thought about the competencies for social and emotional learning that they wanted to address. And so those competencies were growth mindset, self-efficacy, self-management, and social awareness. So as we think about, the district had adopted a definition from a consortium that has worked for a number of years on social and emotional learning, and they have also adopted these competencies. When asked how students, teachers, school-level administrators, and district administrators defined SEL, they all had their own definitions. So they did not relate back to this one common definition of social and emotional learning and the competencies. They did what you all did in the poll. They selected several of these different definitions, such as addressing the needs of the whole child, or focusing on safe and supportive school climate, or inclusion, based on their specific interests and vision at the school level. So there was some alignment, but also some disconnect between how the districts were defining and approaching social and emotional learning, what was happening at the school level. I mean, we can even say the school administrator level, and then what was happening at the classroom level in terms of social and emotional learning. And so because of some of those disconnects, there were opportunities that were missed in terms of creating one solid vision for social and emotional learning and all working towards a common goal in that regard. So as we think about that and we think about how we're all defining social and emotional learning, in order for us to be on the same page, in order to get the buy-in, in order to determine whether or not we're doing whole school efforts as an approach, or if we're looking at the adults in the building as an approach, or we're focusing on developing the social and emotional competence of students, or we're thinking about the mental health supports for students, those different approaches come with different ideas about how we think about social and emotional learning. So if there's disparate ideas around SEL, then that's going to impact the time that we dedicate to using or engaging in SEL. Is going to impact the way that teachers feel about SEL in the building, or principal administrators, or even central office staff. So it's really important to think about when we say social emotional learning and that we're working on social and emotional learning, what is it that we're trying to achieve? What are we trying to, is it a process or is it an outcome that we're trying to achieve? Because that was one of the things that the districts in California recognized, that they weren't all on the same page in regards to that particular line of thinking.
So what does this mean for us moving forward? So let's take a moment to think about how we can actually take this back to our school or to our district. So there's an opportunity for us to decide on a common definition, which is what we learned is where there was an issue. They weren't necessarily on the same page. So there's an opportunity for us to decide on a common definition or description of SEL along with the competencies that align to that definition. So, so we encourage you to go back and take that next step.
So we are thinking about social and emotional learning in terms of safe learning environments. And as we do that, we're going to talk about one of the projects that the Center for Education Services is working on in North Carolina. And so we are working with 3 North Carolina school districts across the state that serve different regions of the state. And there's 1 elementary, 3 middle, and 2 high schools that are part of this work. And it is a proactive approach to school safety. And so in this project, safety is defined as students feeling included, feeling that they have a trusted adult in the building, and feeling as though they can be themselves and take academic and social risks to bridge a community that is rooted in authentic, trusting relationships. And so this project was a result of a grant that was provided through the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction in order to be a proactive support for school safety. And as we see across all levels of schools, it's important that we think about social and emotional learning and school safety. So oftentimes we may see that we want to start at the elementary level, but thinking about the supports that we can provide at the middle school level and the high school level are also important. And so in this project, the aim was to increase adult awareness and motivation and knowledge of strategies to combat cognitive biases. And so in order to do that, if we're combating cognitive bias, then we can foster and support a positive learning environment. So in this project, we are focused on the adults in the building. And so that includes school resource officers, counselors, teachers, front office staff, cafeteria workers, because we know that the entire school contributes to a positive and safe learning environment and helps to build the social and emotional competence of teachers. The social and emotional competence of students. And so having everyone involved in thinking about what does that look like, what does that mean, and coming to a common vision and definition around social and emotional learning is important. And that's why we also created within this project core teams at the district level to think about how the district's vision for social and emotional learning aligns to the school's vision, which also aligns to the work that teachers are doing in the classroom. In addition to that, some of the schools are creating SEL teams. And so a SEL team is a social, emotional, and learning team that's working to help craft this definition, think about the strategies that the schools want to employ, and then engaging in professional learning around social and emotional learning. So let's take a poll and think about what word would you use to describe what a safe learning environment looks and sounds like. And you can submit more than one word or as many words as you like in thinking about this question. Okay, so we have respectful, inclusive, comfortable, engaged, happy, authentic, engaged, peaceful, confidential, collaborative, active, comfort. So as we continue to think about social and emotional learning, these are all words that could be used to describe the things, the ways that we would want our students to feel if they had social awareness or if there was self-awareness around being active, knowing how to set boundaries, being productive, being inclusive of others. So as we think about that, we want to make sure that we're thinking about in school safety, we're also thinking about the social and emotional competence of both students and teachers. And so as we think about considerations for school safety and the overlap with social and emotional learning, it might be interesting for you to think about some things that foster a positive and safe learning environment. And so those include how the adults in the building are building and managing their own social emotional learning competence so that they can model and practice with each other and with students ways to be inclusive and equitable. And also consider, how do students know that they are welcome and expected when they come to school, that they will be protected and cared for and included? So what types of conversations are being had across the district and in schools and across classrooms to think about and explore some of these different types of considerations? We also know that relationships are important. But authentic relationships, what they look like and sound like, could also be explored in thinking about social emotional learning and safe school environments. And then also thinking about proactive strategies. So what are some of the strategies that you already have in place to help students as they think about building their own social and emotional competence? Because this is skill building, and so they need to have opportunities to reflect and practice as we do often.
So, yet again, let's take another moment to actually consider a next step or an idea in moving forward, getting closer to being able to implement um, these actions in our environments. So, something that we could do is to identify stakeholders in the building that can help define and cultivate safe learning environments. So what does that look like? Going back to have those conversations, whether it's with the SRO or with individuals that are part of student services or the administrator or even the cafeteria worker. I mean, just having that conversation about what it means to actually create a safe learning environment for all students. So now let's take a moment to look at common practices for building safe learning environments. So oftentimes when we think, now we're really getting into what it means to actually um, implement practices in the school building. And again, as we stated earlier, there's definitely there's definitely the idea or the knowing of what it looks like, and and but oftentimes the struggle is how do we go about creating it. So here there are some descriptions that we can highlight as far as the conception of social emotional learning that we believe that could actually promote these particular strategies. So, so here are some examples. All right, there we are. So here are 6 school level practices to support student SEL. So so in looking at strategies to promote positive school climate and relationships, you see there oftentimes in some schools that they actually um, they have advisory period for students to get together with a teacher to have conversations. I'm sure there are several of you that are on a call that have actually created these type of sessions for students. You see that there's the whole school culture, building strategies, promoting personal interaction to build trust and relationships. So just the rapport that teachers um, have with their students, um, not just teachers, but also staff, administrators. Uh, in supporting positive behavior, there's an opportunity to actually look at what different practices we can use. So instead of going the route of um, suspensions, but we often hear about restorative practice where there's more conversation when dealing with students whenever they make the wrong choices or the wrong decisions, and determining how to address address whatever the issue is at hand at that moment. Targeted supports for individuals and groups. So depending on the situation, there's definitely a different strategy or approach. Uh, Number 3, promoting engagement, relationships, and SEL-related skills using elective courses and extracurricular activities. So oftentimes schools will have different clubs. And so to be honest with you, when you think about this, there are things that are what you consider to be the traditional happenings in schools, but there's an opportunity here to be very specific and intentional in the design of the clubs to support leadership and inclusion, or after school programs to actually support the emotional needs of students, for SEL specific classroom practices and curricula. So this is written curriculum that is specific to addressing needs of students and how you actually go about creating these positive classroom environments. Strategies for managing emotions. So some strategies might include deep breathing or how to stop, think, act. So having those conversations with students. Um, 5, marshaling human capital. So there's an opportunity to actually hire and bring on board specific positions that address the social and emotional needs of students um, that are in attendance at the school. And, and not just students, but also the social and emotional needs of the adults. And then lastly, there's an opportunity uh, to measure the impact of these particular social and emotional skills strategies that are being used at the school. So looking at that data in order to determine what are our next actionable steps. So these are just some examples of practices that you can actually use in supporting your social learning at your school.
So then within these core districts, as they thought about district level support, again, one of the things that was really important that they found was the need for priorities and frameworks around social and emotional learning. So it's not enough to say that we're doing social and emotional learning and not have something in place to identify SEL as a priority, or to assume that everyone understands what it means to move forward in supporting adults or student competence around SEL. Additionally, as Dee stated earlier, marshaling human capital or staffing was really important for these core districts. So how reflective of the student population were the staff members? Were there any roles within the district that could support this work? At the school level, were there any roles that could support the work? How could they have these conversations with schools and then support the school in implementing any types of programs or curricula that were used to support SEL? The selection process for programs and curricula. There's currently research happening around measuring social and emotional competence. What does that look like? And so in these core districts, they use survey data to help them think about the needs of students and teachers within the district. Also providing training. So what training is necessary to support all members within the district with building the competence and being able to help students build their competence in the social and emotional learning areas that the districts had identified as important. And again, we said some of those were growth mindset and social awareness. And then also looking at measurement and data use. So taking the results from the surveys and understanding how to use those to help them select what types of interventions or programs they wanted to use or what types of training they wanted to implement and to help their teachers and administrators. So as you think about this and think about ways to address SEL, we have a poll to ask you what approach to SEL is the best. So do you think that a comprehensive program is best, a coordinated program that may have several strategies or interventions aligned, or any strategies or interventions will support social and emotional learning? Okay, so it seems like we have comprehensive program, edging out coordinated focus strategies for interventions just by a little bit, by 20%. So this is interesting that we're split almost 50-50 on this. So actually, the research states that effective programs and interventions follow these characteristics. There are sequence activities that lead in a coordinated and connected way to skills that have been specified to be built. They include active forms of learning, so whether that is adult professional learning or in the classroom instruction. They're focused activities to develop one or more social skills. So not only are they sequenced, but they're also focused. And then lastly, there are explicit targets. So there are outcomes concerning these specific skills. And so comprehensive programs are important, but also a coordinated set of strategies or interventions that might be something that the school has decided, okay, we want to focus on self-management. So one of the things that we're going to work on is being able to name emotions. And we're going to build upon that throughout the year. That is just as effective as a comprehensive program that you might purchase or that you might design on your own. The important part is that they are representative of the 4 characteristics of the effective program. So if you wanted to start at the intervention level where you're using 2 or 3 strategies across the school or across the district and say these are aligned to what we believe social and emotional learning is, and we want to promote responsible decision making, and this is our outcome. As long as there is alignment among your vision, your strategies, and your outcomes, then you're going to have, or that's going to contribute to an effective program or intervention around social and emotional learning. So with that being the case, we want to think about, or have you think about, what does that currently look like and what could that look like in your district or school?
So that brings us to another possible idea, a next step. And so you want to put yourself in a position where you're now ready to plan, do, study, and act. And so the core districts in California, they had their why, which was to close the achievement gap in middle school math. RTI and the work that we're doing in North Carolina, our why is to be proactive on issues of school safety and the importance of establishing, and so the importance of establishing a why for focusing on SEL in your classroom and school district. So I think it's imperative that you put yourself in a position where you ask, what is your why? Why is it that we would actually want to implement social emotional learning again in your classroom, in your school, in your district? So it all starts with a plan, and then after developing your plan, pulling all stakeholders in to have those conversations, after developing your plan, actually doing, and then studying the results, seeing what happens, at posing questions. Okay, is it actually, what are some things that actually need to be in place in order to move forward? Um, and then doing the research and finding what is out there. So studies like the one that we referenced today during our call in California. This hopefully eventually the results that we will get from the work that we're doing in North Carolina, as well as other research and studies that are out there that you can actually use to pull particular strategies, glean from their experience in order to finally come up with the best solution, the best possible steps to take, and actually putting um, your plan, your acts, excuse me, your plan into action. And so, um, and so this is what it takes to get to a point where we're being productive, where we're being effective in implementing strategies and practices that ultimately get to the point where we're addressing the needs of students, social emotional needs of our students, of all students. So, Frederica, I'll turn it back. Would you like to add?
Sure. So we have,
Sorry. There we go.
I'm sorry, Dee.
Nope, you go ahead.
So we have one question, but if you have any additional questions that you'd like, please type them in the chat and we'll try to answer those here. So one question was, you mentioned adding equity within the CASEL definition. Any examples of what that may look like? So sure, the Oakland Unified School District, they added to that definition that everyone strengthens their social competencies to connect across race, class, culture, language, gender identity, sexual orientation, learning needs, and age. And so in their infusion of equity, they talked about what the importance of, or why the competencies that they chose, and I will type what I said into the chat box, why they chose their competencies there. Yes, we will also share the slides from our presentation today, certainly. Are there any other questions? Yeah, so there's a question about programs that have been successful in the use of second step. So it depends on your outcomes for SEL. So second step has been shown in the research to be an effective program. Again, it depends on what level the students are and what your outcome is for SEL. Along with the slides, we can also send an overview of a couple of programs that support SEL, and then making sure that you go back and think about what's our common definition, who are the stakeholders who can help us think about this, what are some of the strategies that can be used to support SEL. Having that conversation along with your resources is going to be really important. Do we have any other questions?
So Frederick, I think there's a question in regards to outcomes of second step, but I actually, we have a link that we can provide that actually there's a lot of detail in regards to the outcomes of second step, depending on what in particular they're looking at, whether it's regards to social emotional learning for early learning, or whether that's for adult learning, middle school, high school. So we can send the link that actually goes into detail to provide you with the actual outcomes of second step.